A 22-year-old woman named Simone had grown up in this picturesque village, but this was going to be her last summer before she left and headed off to New York City to start the next chapter of her life. Some of Simone's fondest memories of her childhood were of her time spent at summer camp. But when Simone became a teenager and was too old to be a camp attendee, she decided she would volunteer and be a camp counselor. And she found it was awesome. And so every summer, Simone had gone back and volunteered again. And this summer was no different. Simone packed up her things and she headed off to the forest. The 200 plus kids that were attending the camp, they would get dropped off in the morning, and then in the late afternoon, their parents would come back and pick them up. However, the 30 plus counselors, they would just stay at the camp for the full 2 weeks. They would just sleep in tents out in the forest. Simone and the other counselors arrived at the campgrounds and everything went off without a hitch. And then that afternoon, Simone and the other counselors rushed to finish up all their duties and then headed off into the woods to enjoy their first night hanging out together. Everybody was in good spirits and laughing and telling stories. But pretty quickly, people started to fade and get tired. People very gradually began retiring to their tents to go to bed. Simone found that night it was so hot she couldn't be in her tent. And so she decides she's just going to sleep out in the open where it's a little bit cooler. She sees there are several other counselors who have done the same thing. Eventually, she would fall asleep. However, she would immediately be thrust into one of the most visceral and intense nightmares she had ever had in her entire life. In her dream, she opens her eyes and she looks out in front of her, and it's this desert city, and there are hundreds of people all in front of her, just standing there looking up at her. And then she notices on her left and on her right are these two men that are both working on something behind her. And she kind of glances up at one of them and she notices he's holding something that looks like a holiday wreath you would hang on your door. No one's moving, no one's making any sound, they're just staring at her. And then she feels this shooting pain in the top of her head. The man who was standing on her right was not holding a holiday wreath. He was holding a crown of thorns. And now he, along with the guy on the other side of her, were working together to press this crown of thorns into her head. And she tries to fight them off, but she realizes she can't move. She can't even turn her head to look at them. She can only see them out of her periphery vision. And then she tries to scream out for help, but when she opens her mouth, no sound comes out. And as soon as she woke up, she shot up and she reached for her head to make sure there was no crown of thorns on her. And as she's doing that, she's thinking, okay, phew, it was just a dream. That was just a horrible dream. I'm in this forest. I'm good. I'm safe. And as she's kind of patting on her head, she's realizing her head is wet. And as she's touching her head, she's realizing it hurts. And so as she's kind of having this realization that her dream is now kind of segued into her real life, she looks out ahead of her and she sees off in the distance in the tree line, something is running through the woods. She can't tell who or what it is, but she makes a mental note that there is someone running away from them. But this pain in her head has gotten so intense that she can't focus on anything else. She can only focus on the pain. And as she's thinking about how much her head hurts, she screams. And the girl who was laying next to her that had been asleep, she wakes up to the sound of the scream. She reaches down and she picks up a flashlight. She turns it on and she aims the light at Simone, illuminating her head. And when this friend sees Simone's head, she starts to scream. Seconds later, the rest of the counselors that had been sleeping out were awake and they were rushing Simone over to one of the staff vans. And then 15 minutes later, they had driven her to the emergency room. It would turn out, after Simone had finally fallen asleep and she began having that really intense dream, in reality, something was digging into her scalp and it was kind of manifesting itself in her dream. And what was digging into her scalp was the jaws of a fox. This fox had snuck into the campsite and walked right up behind Simone and just started eating her head. And amazingly, it did not wake Simone up right away. What Simone saw running away from her in that quick moment was the fox. Doctors were able to save Simone and stitch her head back together, and they were even able to hide all of the scars in her hairline so you can't even see them. But despite her being physically okay today, not only does she refuse now to go into any forest, whether it's day or night, but she also periodically still gets phantom pains in her scalp that feels like the fox is biting her head all over again. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.